Muy bien, buenos días. Muy buenos días a todos, a todas. Bienvenidos a nuestro último día de Congreso. Para los que llevamos ya 3, el cansancio se empieza a notar. Para los que estuvimos en el pre-conference, el Congreso de ayer, hoy ya empieza esto a estar. Pero bueno, muy satisfechos, muy contentos y espero que todo esté saliendo. Y reitero las disculpas por parte del comité organizador si algo nos sale a gusto de todos, y lo estamos intentando. Simplemente que nos queda la keynote del profesor Robert Bringel, al que tengo el honor ahora mismo de presentar, y luego tomaremos café, haremos networking, estaremos un rato charlando con los colegas y después nos vamos a las aulas a presentar el resto de comunicaciones y simposios que ayer no se presentaron. Y luego nos juntaremos un momentito aquí para despedirnos, ¿vale? Ese es un poco el plan del día. Os recuerdo un poco esas normas de, por favor, no se puede comer en el salón de actos, no se puede comer ni beber, solo agua, por favor. Que no utilicemos las puertas laterales, que por favor a las 2 intentemos estar, 2 y media, intentemos estar todos fuera del edificio, que estamos haciendo el hashtag APSU9 por si alguien quiere tuitear, y que cualquier tema que tengáis, pues que nos lo vayáis pidiendo, ¿vale? Bueno, y sin más, it's for me a pleasure to introduce you Robert Bringel. Es para mí un placer presentaros a Robert Bringel. Creo que no necesita demasiada presentación, porque todo el mundo que hemos trabajado en algo de aprendizaje-servicio hemos leído sus libros, hemos leído sus papers y de alguna manera hemos bebido de esas fuentes. Pero bueno, por si acaso, Dr. Robert Bringel es un senior scholar del Centro for Service Learning de Aprendizaje-Servicio de Indiana University Purdue en Indianápolis. Su inicio en el mundo de la investigación tenía que ver con los celos, y sus principales investigaciones, él es un psicólogo social, sus principales líneas de investigación al principio de su carrera ha tenido que ver con los celos en las relaciones, ¿vale? Pero luego empezó, además de eso, empezó a trabajar en el aprendizaje-servicio y creó el Indiana University Purdue Center for Service Learning entre 1994 y 2012. Este centro, que no voy a repetir el nombre porque es muy largo, pero este centro ha sido catalogado el 8º mejor en los Estados Unidos de todas las universidades y colleges. En 2002 fue catalogado como el 8 y es uno de los mejores programas, ha ido repitiendo ese award todos los años. Y además en 2006 recibió el premio del presidente, el Presidential Award. Profesor Bringel ha publicado varios libros y muchos libros y papers. He destacado algunos en su currículum. El otro día cuando me mandó el currículum teníamos 50 páginas de publicaciones, así que no os voy a aburrir porque aquí habéis venido a oír a Robert y no a mí. Pero, por ejemplo, con el servicio en la mente, with service in mind, concepts and models for service learning, conceptos y modelos de aprendizaje-servicio en psicología. Un tema, yo lo he destacado aquí porque tiene que ver con la mesa redonda de ayer, pero ha escrito un libro que se llama Colleges and Universities como ciudadanos. Los colegios, las universidades y los colleges como ciudadanos. Bueno, y me estoy repitiendo ya entre el inglés y el español, perdonadme. Bueno, o cómo investigar en aprendizaje-servicio como un outcome del compromiso ciudadano de los estudiantes y las estudiantes. Tiene un montón de premios, es consultor para otros campus internacionalmente, entre otros South África, Macedonia, México, Egipto, Irlanda, Malasia, Japón, Hong Kong, Singapur, Spain y the Netherlands, entre otras cosas. Es doctor honoris causa en 2004 en la Universidad de South África y tiene, bueno, pues además varios premios y ahora mismo está disfrutando de una beca Fulbright que le tiene por aquí, por Europa, en Ámsterdam, y gracias a esa beca Fulbright también le podemos tener hoy con nosotros en el Congreso. Es para nosotros un honor. Muchas gracias. Welcome, Dr. Bringel. We are just hesitating to hear you. Thank you very much.
Good morning, and thank you, Carlos, and my thanks to Carlos and Pilar and the organizing group for this Congress. I'm very pleased to be here and to see the energy and the good work that's taking place in Spain. This is my third trip to Spain to work with colleges and universities on service learning, and I think my 10th trip to Europe to work with different universities. I'm pleased to see the growth in service learning in courses, and I hope that is eventually followed with similar efforts directed toward institutionalizing service learning at universities in Spain and Europe. My comments on service learning and its connection to democracy, diversity, and dialogue are intended to extend your thinking about the civic learning component of service learning, which is the defining and distinguishing aspect of service learning. I would like to start with mentioning the work by the Council of Europe, which published Competences for Democratic Culture. I believe it was 3 years ago. This book provides a framework for delineating the civic learning domain, and it identifies 20 competences. Framework focuses on values, attitudes, skills, and knowledge and critical understanding of outcomes for educating for democratic citizenship and intercultural dialogue. I found this framework to be very extensive, but also very general. There's not much attention to the development of civic aspects of various competences. For anchoring the importance of civic learning in higher education, I'd like to quote David Matthews from America. Why do we need more than a vocational education? In part because we live more than a vocational life. We live a larger civic life, and we have to be educated for it. Civic learning is the most distinctive aspect of service learning. Returning to the competence book, I do like the emphasis that is placed on intercultural dialogue to develop democratic competences. This is consistent with my thesis this morning, that dialogue within the context of diversity is a key component to developing civic learning. The Council of Europe's group has published a second monograph on pedagogy, and service learning is identified as one of the pedagogies that can develop these competencies. To me, this means there is a tremendous opportunity for each of you to contribute your knowledge, your experience, and hopefully your research and scholarship to the future work in Europe and internationally on democratic competencies and various pedagogical approaches to achieving them. Let me first explore with you the what, why, and how of service learning, and how I think it can contribute to civic competencies. To preview my thesis, I want to explore with you how democratic processes, diversity experiences, and dialogue across diversity are important ingredients to making service learning courses realize their potential to develop these competencies. Let me start by clearly stating what I am talking about. The beginning of wisdom is to call things by their right names. As many of you know, civic engagement is a worldwide movement in higher education with a scholarly basis, regional organizations, and conferences and journals to supply venues for scholarship and research. Let me situate service learning within this broader framework of civic engagement by clarifying how I will be using various terms and words. What is civic engagement? Well, as you can see in this slide, there are lots of terms associated with this work. Public scholarship, civic education, scholarship of engagement, outreach. However, I found this Venn diagram to be useful for organizing and analyzing the nature of community engagement. It starts with the three primary areas of faculty work: teaching, service, and research. I'm aware that this diagram and framework is an American framework and deviates from the European framework of teaching, research, and third mission. Service in the American context and third mission in the European context overlap, but they also have distinct qualities. Bear with me as I use the term service as the third area of faculty work and student activities. The Venn diagram notes that all three of these activities can occur on campus and in professional venues. However, it also notes that each of them can occur in the community. A campus can deliver courses to community sites, which is a function that is usually in Europe's third mission, but I've put here under teaching. Researchers can go into the community to collect data, and instructors and staff can take their professional expertise and provide services to communities. Turning to service learning, you see it's the intersection of teaching and service, and it has dual purposes: to be beneficial to communities and to be beneficial to students and educational goals. However, not all community-based learning is service learning. As you can see in this slide, there are many different types of community-based courses in higher education. Field work experiences, cooperative education or work integrated learning, internships, practica, pre-professional field experiences, for example, clinical experiences in nursing, pre-professional teaching experiences for education students, and applied learning. So we need a definition of service learning that differentiates service learning from these other types of community-based learning. Unfortunately, there are over 200 definitions of service learning in the literature. Allow me to offer the following definition that Julie Hatcher, my colleague, and I developed. Let me read this to you. Service learning is a course-based, credit-bearing educational experience in which students participate in mutually identified and organized service activities that benefit the community. And reflect on the service activity in such a way as to gain further understanding of course content, a broader appreciation of the discipline or profession, and an enhanced sense of personal values and civic responsibility. This definition aligns well with the definition that guided the work of Europe Engaged. Allow me to highlight 4 key components of this definition. First, it states that service learning is course-based. I've observed that much of service learning, particularly service learning in international settings, does not have a strong academic or course-based component. I think you should clearly differentiate academic service learning courses from co-curricular programs that are volunteer service programs. Academic learning must be central to service learning, and all practitioners must continue to strive to improve the academic integrity of service learning. Volunteer service programs are good, worthwhile programs that can have clearly identified learning objectives. But if they're not part of the academic curriculum, and if they don't have learning assessed, then they shouldn't be called service learning. And I don't care what you call it, service learning, community service learning, academic service learning. What's important is how it's designed. Returning to the definition, it also notes the importance of working with communities to establish the basis for service learning. This is so important it bears restating. Because of the commitment to work with the community, not just studying the community, not just for the community, the nature of relationships involved in service learning is central and defining. One of the large shortcomings that I've seen in the implementation of service learning is community-based activities characterized as charity models of haves giving to have-nots. A tension that is embedded in service learning is the tension between service as charity versus service as a mechanism for social justice, social change, and advocacy. Charity orientations are particularly strong in American service learning. In contrast, in the Southern Hemisphere, there's much more emphasis on increasing awareness of and action toward systemic change, as well as issues associated with power, oppression, and privilege. Across all service learning, both in America and worldwide, practitioners can improve reciprocity. They can do a better job of making these relationships more interdependent, possess better communication, and involve community partners as co-educators. In American higher education and in examples I've seen around the world, too often the relationships in service learning are best described as student activities in communities or for communities, rather than working with community partners. So I think you can do a critical examination of service learning activities and see where they fit into a typology like this. Is it about the community? Is it in the community? Is it doing things for the community? Or are students and instructors working with community partners? The service may be working with residents, clients, or other constituencies in direct service. They may be activities working with agency staff at NGOs, providing indirect service, conducting research with the community, for example, participatory action research, or advocating for social change. And as Carlos mentioned yesterday in the panel, we should be training and educating students to change and improve society. The definition also identifies reflection as a key component of service learning. My experience is that reflection continues to be an underdeveloped aspect of service learning courses, both in America and internationally. Too often, students are asked to keep open-ended journals or to write descriptive papers about their experiences. I will be blunt. Open-ended descriptive journals are not good reflection. Good reflection is structured around learning objectives. Structured around learning objectives. Good reflection requires students to intentionally connect the community activities to 3 areas of learning: academic learning, civic learning, and personal growth. Good reflection causes students to engage in new learning and then captures that learning so it can be assessed and provide a basis for feedback. Finally, this definition of service learning identifies what I will contend is the unique contribution that service learning brings to higher education, and the reason that I think it will remain on the scene as an important pedagogy. And that is civic education, which is referred to in the definition by the phrase personal values and civic responsibility. What service learning does well, and I think better than any other pedagogy, is not just having students serve in order to learn or doing in order to learn. That is applied learning. But also learning to serve, which is the civic education component of service learning. What service learning should accomplish is having students think about, consider, and analyze what their role is in society with regard to civic, social, and political issues, now, while they're students, and in the future, after graduation. Guillermo yesterday puzzled us with the comment he didn't know what a good citizen is. That's challenging, coming from the mayor's office of City Hall. Let me make a few comments about civic learning. First of all, civic learning is a multifaceted category of learning that resists a universal or a single definition. How service learning occurs is shaped by the course content, the instructor, the community activities, and the community context. It is also shaped by the political, social, economic, and historical context of a region or a nation. So civic learning in America will be different than civic learning in Singapore, South Africa, or Europe. This diversity points to a strength of service learning in that it does not insist on a particular definition of civic. A service learning course and experience can be designed to address a range of context and discipline-specific interpretations of civic and civic learning. Battistoni did an analysis of what it means to be a good citizen, or what is civic and what is civic learning. His analysis identifies these approaches, which he organizes around disciplines or professions. That different disciplines or professions have a signature meaning of civic. For example, civic professionalism would apply to business education. What does it mean to be a civically oriented business person? Social responsibility, social justice would be indicative of social work. Connected knowing and the ethic of caring would be indicative of nursing as a profession. Public leadership would be reflected in public affairs and public administration curricula that are preparing individuals for government work. Public intellectual would be reflected in the humanities. And engaged or public scholarship would be focused on conducting research on civic issues. The potential is that service learning can facilitate the achievement of each of these civic domains. The importance of these different views of civic-mindedness is that they can provide a basis for answering questions. What do we mean when we say we want to produce a civic-minded history major, a civic-minded art major, a civic-minded engineer, a civic-minded pharmacist, or a civic-minded French major? We need to identify the knowledge and skills for each of these perspectives and provide a basis for framing answers to those questions so that we can identify learning objectives associated with them. By its nature, service learning has students involved with and collaborating with diverse others. And we are accumulating some very strong evidence about the impact of diversity experiences on learning. Bowman conducted a meta-analysis in which he found that face-to-face diversity experiences versus didactic instruction. Face-to-face diversity experiences were related to enhanced civic attitudes. Using service learning increases the likelihood that students will have intentional and educationally meaningful diversity experiences that occur within the context of well-designed service learning courses, learning objectives, reflection, partnerships, and assessment. Pasquarello's research is particularly impressive. This is based on thousands of students. Let me quote his findings. Our findings with an objective, standardized measure of clinical thinking skills support the argument that exposure to diversity experiences fosters the development of cognitive growth and more complex modes of thought. The cognitive effect of diversity experiences appears to be sustained during 4 years of college or university, and may even increase in magnitude over time. More experiences are better. The 4-year effect in our findings persisted even in the presence of controls. This is well-conducted research. Not only, and they controlled for important pre-college experiences and traits like pre-college critical thinking scores and standardized test scores, but also for a wide range of other important college experiences. Diversity still has value added. Students entering college with relatively low standardized test scores derive substantially greater 4-year critical thinking benefits from engagement in interactional diversity experiences. So it not only works for a breadth of students, it works better for those who are marginal. However, simply having students interact with diverse groups may be insufficient for developing civic skills. Keene and Keene's research on student outcomes found that dialogue across difference is the key, not just immersion. This phrase came from a 7-year longitudinal study of the impact of a Bonner Scholar program involving 30 colleges and over 1,000 students. Post-graduation, dialogue with others across difference was the strongest predictor for cultivating civic outcomes and producing lasting consequences in the lives of students after they left college. It predicted how they were engaged in their careers and in their communities. There's a second finding from this research that's important. In addition, both structured and informal reflection independently predicted civic outcomes after graduation: civic mindedness, voluntary action, civic action. So reflection is important, not just the interaction. Peter Levine's research found that simply involving students in community service activities is insufficient for developing civic skills. They must, according to Peter, be involved in collaborative relationships that involve deliberation in the civic realm with community partners. And to preview my thoughts about democracy, I love Harry Boyd's characterization of what do we mean by democracy. And let me give you his statement. Democracy is people who disagree getting things done. So what Peter Levine's research is showing is the importance of students working with community partners. So this alerts us to the conclusion that there is more to service learning than just doing service. particularly if we want to develop civic and democratic competencies among our students. And structured critical reflection alerts us to the challenge as educators that reflection must be guided by and designed around learning objectives in the academic domain, the civic domain, and the area of personal growth. In addition, good reflection must be structured around those learning objectives. It occurs regularly during the student's experience. It doesn't occur just at the end of the experience, but during the experience. It provides a basis for feedback. Feedback could be from community partners, from students, or from the instructor. And it is linked to values. Thus, it is critical reflection on the experience, not the experience alone, that generates and provides evidence of learning. The democratic nature of relationships and activities is also important. For as Aristotle noted, if you want to learn to play the harp, play the harp. If you want to learn to build a house, build a house. If you want to teach justice, be just. And I would add to Aristotle's quote, if you want to teach democratic civic skills, involve students in activities that reflect democratic values, and in partnerships that are democratic. This may be the most important thing I say today. Ready? Charitable relationships are not democratic. What are those democratic partnerships that should be embedded in civically engaged pedagogies? I'm not talking about American democracy. I'm not talking about Trump's version of democracy. I'm talking about general democracy. So, to create a democratic culture that inculcates democratic values, it needs to have the following attributes. It should be inclusive. Who's at the table? Who's not at the table? It should be participatory. Who's talking? Who's not talking? Collaborative. With participation of multiple constituencies. Focused on public issues and possible solutions. Should be action-oriented. And there is respect for different ways of knowing and different types of knowledge that take place in that diverse interaction. Saltmarsh and his colleagues reconceptualized civic engagement as democratic engagement. And democratic engagement that encompasses democratic processes and democratic purposes. Does your service learning do this? Can it? So there's a problem with the S word in service learning. As Benjamin Barber notes, and I'll read this quote, the language of charity drives a wedge between self-interest and altruism. Either or. Leading students to believe that service is a matter of sacrificing private interests to moral virtue. Oh, I guess that's something I'll do Saturday morning, once a month. I'll make that sacrifice. Whereas the language of citizenship and democracy suggests that self-interests are always embedded in communities of action. And that in serving neighbors, one also serves oneself. This leads to a radical reconceptualization of epistemology. In the new paradigm, it isn't enough that everybody gets something out of the interaction. That's mutuality. Tit for tat. You get something, I get something. Saltmarsh is aspiring to reciprocity of epistemologies and respect for different ways of knowing. Reciprocity signals an epistemological shift that values not only expert knowledge that is rational, analytic, and positivist, the academic mold of epistemology, but also values a different kind of rationality that is more relational, localized, and contextual, and favors mutual deference between laypersons and academics. This is a huge challenge for academic staff, instructors, and culture, that there are multiple ways of knowing. This also identifies another set of learning objectives that has democratic as its central modifier. What might it mean to your service learning to have as intended learning objectives democratic thinking, democratic critical reflection, democratic partnerships, and democratic skills and democratic ways of behaving? Patty Clayton and I have postulated that democratic civic identity then becomes a superordinate educational goal for the new paradigms that are implied by what service learning can contribute to pedagogy in higher education. In 2011, I wrote the following. If a medical researcher discovered a cure for cancer or some other serious illness, there would be great enthusiasm about the development and a sense of urgency for publicizing its availability to the benefit of as many patients as possible. By analogy, what if higher education identified a pedagogical approach that had educational outcomes that are extensive, that is, influence a broad array of desirable educational outcomes, that are robust? They work across a variety of conditions and for a wide range of students, that are transformational, that produce permanent changes in the present and future lives of students, and that are distinctive, produce educational outcomes that can't be reached by other pedagogies. Is there such a pedagogy? I speculate that international service learning is the most powerful pedagogy that exists in higher education. When I speak of international service learning, I'm referring to the integration of two high-impact practices: courses that immerse a student in a novel setting for a significant period of time, typically study abroad, but that could happen domestically, and involve students in that setting through educationally meaningful community service. I am not talking about international service programs that lack an academic component. And I know that there are those programs developed in Europe, particularly pre-collegiate programs, that take students to international settings and have them do community service. That's okay. But I'm not talking about those programs. I'm talking about academic service learning courses that immerse students with service activities that allow them to collaborate. I think these programs of international service learning are the best pedagogies for preparing students for the 21st century and for global citizenship. And I've challenged researchers to prove me wrong. I don't think they will. Let us assume that I'm correct, that it is the most powerful pedagogy that we have. Let me suggest that international service learning can capture the 3 Ds that I've highlighted: diversity, dialogue, and democracy. Of course, international service learning would incorporate diversity. But it should not be unstructured diversity experiences. The diversity component should be part of the intentional design of the learning experience. ISL, International Service Learning, can create opportunities for dialogue with individuals in collaborating communities, but has to be arranged. Going and painting a school building in a different country is not very collaborative. And maybe international service learning can also encompass democratic practices and result in democratic skills. That is the aspiration that I hold up to each of you as educators. How can we design and implement pedagogies that have the qualities that we know will produce outcomes that we desire? Service learning stresses the importance of each person, faculty, staff, students, community partners, assuming roles as co-learners, co-educators, co-generators of knowledge. I would ask you to think about your service learning experiences with regard to that standard. Service learning brings a new look that incorporates the vision that relationships can broaden the role of different persons as educators and broaden the epistemological basis for how learning occurs. Diversity and dialogue, when coupled with service learning and reflection, at their best, can and should embody democratic epistemology. Who cares about civic learning? Here are some of the audiences that I think care. Your colleagues, funding agencies, quality assurance. It may play a role in quality assurance that occurs. Community partners sure care about civic learning. And I want to focus on employers. This was a survey conducted in America, but there have been similar surveys that have been conducted worldwide in multiple countries. This happened to be a survey of chief executive officers of corporations. What do they value most? What would they like to see more of in the education of students they employ? Civic knowledge by a majority of them. Applied knowledge in real-world settings. All right. Ethical decision-making and global and intercultural competence. The significance and importance of this work is well illustrated in the CHESP project in South Africa, a project I consulted on for 8 years. With the first democratic election in 1994, the challenge facing South Africa was no longer at the policy level, but at implementing new policies and a democratic government. The Chess Project was a national initiative that was directed at undoing the tragedy of apartheid and at implementing a working democracy by initially piloting service learning at 6 universities with the aspiration of expanding it to other universities. The ultimate aim of CHESP and service learning is the reconstruction and development of South African civil society through the implementation of socially accountable models of higher education. Let me repeat that. The ultimate aim of CHESP and service learning is the reconstruction and development of South African civil society through the implementation of socially accountable models of higher education. Proposed in a white paper after the democratic elections, the Department of Education chose service learning as one of the most important changes that could occur to promote intergroup understanding. They have 12 different official languages in South Africa. Promote intergroup understanding and develop democratic skills among college students of all races. The significance of CHESP is that the stakes are so high for South Africa, and service learning is a method of choice. The work of CHESP provides a strong reminder of the significance that engaging college students in educationally meaningful community service can play, not only in their education, but also in their communities and their democracies. I'd like to conclude with my favorite anecdote. A medieval traveler is walking down a road, comes to a construction site, and he sees a stonemason chiseling. And he asks the stonemason, "What are you doing?" And the stonemason responds, "I'm squaring a stone." He walks on, same construction site, sees another stonemason chiseling, and asks him, "What are you doing?" And the response is, "I'm building a cathedral." Two individuals doing the same work with very different perspectives on their work. Are you just teaching a course? Are you just teaching a service learning course? Or are you contributing to something bigger? What would it be like to be part of revolutionary change in higher education? Civic engagement may be taking higher education through a period of significant transformation with new modes of teaching, new ways of partnering with the community, new ways of thinking about how we learn. I therefore dare you to explore the best ways in which your strengths as an educator and the assets of your work can be developed to further engage your students in educationally meaningful community service in ways that transform their lives and that set an example for the rest of higher education. I challenge you to incorporate diversity and dialogue in ways that contribute to developing the democratic competencies of students. I hope each of you in your own way, as you participate in service learning and community-based activities, do so in a manner that allows you to discover that your work is noble work, and that you maintain a perspective on your work that appreciates these honorable qualities that it has. I look forward to helping you more with your work. Thank you very much.
Okay, we have time for 2, 3, 4 questions. Does anyone want to? Tiempo para 3, 4 preguntas. Profesor Bringel y su.
Good morning or afternoon. Thank you for such enlightening discourse. I'm very interested in the reflection, and I would like to know what do you think are the most errors that we make when we try to enhance reflection?
I've mentioned one, which is limiting students to writing descriptive products. I think the other one is quite often we begin a service learning course, have them engaged in, and then begin to learn about what kinds of learning they're extracting from it. So it's inductive in that we see what happens and then we begin to emphasize that, as opposed to backward design. Backward design, you start with the learning objective. And then you say, if this is what I want to achieve, I want students to have a better sense of environmental stewardship. I want students to have a better understanding of NGOs. I want students to develop more empathy for marginalized groups. Those are examples of learning objectives. The last one being personal growth. Then you say, what am I going to do? What academic content will there be to support that? Key readings. Who will I have them interact with? What kinds of activities? Some kinds of activities will develop better empathy than other activities. And then you say, and what kind of reflection activities will I engage them in? I didn't take the time in this presentation to present it, but the best model that is framed in that way starts with learning objectives and leads students through structured reflection around academic, civic, and personal, is Patty Clayton's DEAL model. D stands for describe. Describe in detail what happened at this setting, and then examine. And examine, students are led through Bloom's taxonomy with prompts. Now, what's the content that's relevant to that from your life, from your understanding of communities, or from the academic content? How can you better understand what took place? What were the strengths and weaknesses of it? What were the cause and effect? Can you imagine other ways of doing it? What might improve upon that interaction, this agency's mission? How do you evaluate that? And then it asks students, what'd you learn? It doesn't start with what you learned, because students typically write, I learned a lot. It was really interesting. I really benefited a lot from. No. What did you learn about yourself in terms of empathy, about NGOs, about environmental stewardship? What did you learn? How did you learn it? Why is it important? How will you use that learning in the future? It's a better way of generating learning among students as they go through a reflection activity. And that might happen 5 or 6 times during a service learning course. So, flaws and ways of improving. And it's very much backward design, because you identify the learning objective before you ever write those prompts for the examine phase. But students are much better equipped then to say, this is what I learned, and this is why it's important, and this is how I'll use it. And I can email me. I can give you key references on that and samples of her reflection prompts. Be happy to do that.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for the example of wonderful presentation. Very inspiring, very clear, absolutely. You have mentioned a couple of times the importance of learning and taking information from high quality research. Could you please make some comments or a couple of recommendations for this emerging group as researchers, as scholars, as a practitioner, in relation to how to increase the quality of the evidences in favor of service learning practices and programs in the future, so that more service learning policies can be adopted and defended by academics and politicians?
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. One of the characteristics of our work at my university over a 25-year period now has been emphasizing research on civic engagement and service learning. And I'll mention several ways in which Europeans can begin to follow interests about research. The first would be the International Association of Research on Service Learning and Civic Community Engagement, IR/SLICE we call it. They're beginning to have regional conferences. The first was in Europe 2 years ago at Bologna. I hope that will be repeated, but there's an annual international conference that occurs, well, usually in the fall, but this past year it was in July. Does Tulane know when the next one will be? Where and when? No? Okay. But that is an important venue, and it is the best conference I attend as a researcher. You will learn about good research that's being done, and you will have models of research. At IUPUI, my university, we have every year a research academy where we bring people from across the world together to develop research projects. It occurs in May in 2019. I don't have the dates in front of me. You can Google IUPUI Research Academy, and it's about 40 people. We divide into small groups, and so I'm a quantitative researcher. I have a qualitative researcher on my right shoulder, and we're working with 4 or 5 researchers developing plans for research. The best resources I can recommend for you are 4 books that we've done on research on service learning that are published by Stylus Publishing, S-T-Y-L-U-S. If you Google Bringle and Stylus, I expect you'll get pretty close. We did one on international service learning. That was our first one. The next one was 2 volumes. Volume 1 dealt with conducting research on students and on faculty. And Volume 2B dealt with institutions, communities, and partnerships. And it's a compilation of chapters in which we asked each of the authors what has been done, critically evaluate research on service learning on each of these topics, what theoretical perspectives can you bring to bear on research, what measurement techniques are available in each of these domains, and develop a research agenda, put forth a research agenda on partnerships, for example, on students. And then the 4th book that we did was on student civic learning. And we have general chapters that survey methods for measuring and conceptualizing civic learning in students, how it's related to course design. And then we have chapters that look at civic learning of students from different theoretical perspectives, political science, social psychology, education theory, well-being, philanthropic studies. And then we have some chapters in that volume that deal with how do you get authentic evidence about student learning? How do you conduct longitudinal research? How do you conduct qualitative research? How do you conduct quantitative research? Those are extremely important resources for individuals who want to make this part of their scholarship, doing research on the teaching and learning of service learning. And there are huge opportunities to contribute, to carve out research projects and contribute. And others may have other recommendations for resources on more local. Okay.
Tenemos tiempo para una última pregunta. Una última, muy rápida, por favor.
Me again. I come from Chile, and we're gonna talk a little later with my colleagues about reflection. That's why I'm asking you so much. I would like to know if there's some research or activities, or I don't know, oriented to the reflection of the teachers who do service learning.
Yeah.
Because one thing is to make the students reflect,
Yeah.
but I think one, as a teacher, I'm a teacher, should reflect about what they're doing, but I don't know if there are any activities or investigation related to that. Thank you.
A couple of comments. I think writing scholarship and conducting research on service learning is an extremely important reflection activity for faculty. It causes you to think very critically and carefully about what you're doing, what you're trying to accomplish, or others are trying to accomplish. So that's the first level of reflection. We also have at our university, and this is done around, but it's organizing faculty learning communities. A faculty learning community would be 6, 8, 10 individuals who meet, for example, once a month during 6 months. And it can be focused on designing a service learning course. It could be focused on improving a service learning course. For example, let's have a faculty learning community on reflection. It could be focused on conducting research. We've run one for 12 years, bringing 4, 5, 6 faculty together who do service learning but now want to design studies. Just like our research academy, we've done it as an institution. We also have faculty learning communities on scholarship of engagement and how to document your work for the institution. That's another example of how you could think about engaging faculty in reflection activities. We also look for opportunities to, we're a center, we have a centralized office, so we look for opportunities to involve faculty individually in different activities, writing a grant proposal, writing an article, making presentations to external audiences. I think those sorts of activities are important reflection activities. Patty Clayton ran at North Carolina State a faculty learning community around skills for conducting engaged scholarship, participatory action research. We did an evaluation of that and demonstrated that the skills for conducting research increased as a result of the faculty learning community. So we did research on faculty reflecting on their practice and improving it. So, a comment I made in a session yesterday was that civic learning isn't just for students. Civic learning is also for faculty. What would you do differently at your institution if you intentionally wanted to develop civic learning? But it's not just for faculty. What about administrators? Could they be your students? Rectors, vice rectors, directors? And what would you do with them? We've convened them periodically. What about then community partners? What would you do if you wanted to develop the civic learning of NGO staff? What would you do if you wanted to develop the civic learning of residents or clients, their participation? It was interesting in South Africa when they rolled out service learning and were developing courses, service learning courses. There were 3 people at the table: an instructor, an NGO staff member, and a resident, because they wanted to get those representatives. That was at the course level. At the institutional level, we worked with 6 institutions. There was a core group. That core group included the same representatives of residents, staff, and instructors. All 3 had the opportunity to advance their education 1 degree. If you have a high school degree, we'll work to get you a college degree by working on developing your understanding of service learning and civic engagement. If you have a master's, we'll qualify you for a doctorate. If you have a doctorate, we'll qualify you for a second doctorate. But it illustrates thinking about education in this arena broadly. It's not just about students. That's advanced, but it's aspirational. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Bringle. Thank you for this terrific, inspiring, and I can say challenging conference, and also for your appeal to the coherence of all the civic engagement of all the levels at the university. Thank you very much. Switch into Spanish. Gracias. Vamos a parar. Hay 2 avisos que dar en este momento. Uno de ellos se me acaba de ir de la cabeza, así que necesito por favor a Paula, porque se me acaba de ir de la cabeza lo que tenía que decir. El otro es que nos vamos a ir a tomar el café de comercio justo que tenemos ahora. Tenemos media hora, luego nos vamos a las aulas y por favor a las 2 menos cuarto nos juntamos un momentito aquí para 5 minutos finales de clausura. Si os quería decir, el cuestionario de evaluación os lo vamos a mandar, un cuestionario de evaluación por Google Forms, simplemente para que todo el mundo, bueno, pues nos pueda decir lo que le ha gustado, lo que le ha gustado un poco menos. Y ahora que tengo a Paula aquí, como luego a las 2 menos cuarto muchos tenéis aviones, trenes, tal, no queríamos, desde la organización, no queríamos dejar de darle un fuerte, 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 fuerte aplauso, porque sin ella esto no habría salido hoy. Muy bien, pues a tomar café, que es el momento y la hora.